about the guy who bought the Segway company. You know, Segways, 2 wheels, self-balancing bike thing. He bought the Segway company. So he'd lost his mining job working in mine pits in the 1980s. But then taking all that knowledge from mine pits and explosions, he invented certain barriers that protect you from explosions, and the defense departments of the world bought them up. He had hundreds of millions of pounds of dollars. Very generous guy, gave a lot to charities. Bought the Segway company, I guess in retirement or something. That's a good company to buy, an up-and-coming tech company, in 2009. And in 2010, he accidentally rode it off a cliff on his property and died a year later. Absolutely absurd. I have been part of the scouting movement for my whole life. And a couple of years ago, I was leading a scout camp, an annual scout camp. And so there was 20 of us scout leaders, and we planned the camp. We got it all ready to host 80 or 90 kids. And so we did all the stuff. We whippersnippered the site. We cleared out all the muck from the sheds. We wrote Bible studies. We wrote timetables and schedules and all those kinds of things. We booked horses. We bought food. And then came the week of. So there's lots of driving, because we're from all over New South Wales to get this done. Hours and hours of driving and meeting. The week of the camp came, and we shipped all the food out there, because it's this dirt track that goes for a kilometre and a half. It's just tin sheds out there. So we had to wire up the electricity and put lights up. We had to just everything, you know, we literally bring the kitchen sink, and then we plumb it in, gas, big World War II canvas tents, and all the poles that come with them. Just literally truckloads of stuff was taken out. And then it rained. And we're a pretty tough bunch, and we deal with rain. We've got contingency plans for rain, but not for that much rain. And the road was impassable on the Saturday that was supposed to start. We had to cancel. And just hundreds of hours of work was useless and void. We had to return all the money to the scouts, but we couldn't return the food. And so we bankrupted our slowly accruing bank account that we'd been saving up to buy new bikes and, you know, repair that shed. It was just this useless vanity of a year of the camp. And we had to pack it all down when the rain stopped, you know, go back out, and no one had touched that plumbing, but we had to undo it all and take it apart, the PVC pipes and all that kind of stuff. My mate's high school daughter is a very good swimmer. She's been training at it for years. She trains several mornings a week at 5 a.m. And between the work that she puts in and her natural talent, it turns out that at almost any school around, she's the fastest swimmer. Daylight between her and second. Except she's not at any school. She's at the school with this other girl who competes at states and Australians, and she's always second. And I wonder, this can happen at work as well, in our work lives, that someone who's not too bad at the job gets the job the 1 year, and then someone else comes in that would be really much better at the job and take the company forward to better places a few years later, but they're always going to be second, and maybe their career just pauses and there's just no space. It's just a bit absurd. I have a friend who helps run that scout camp I was telling you about, and he's worked with small aircraft all his life, very confident. He's now got a very senior position in a smallish 1,000-person small aircraft company. And he says it is falling apart and it's dangerous because they're focused on leadership, and all those leaders know nothing about planning fuel routes and timing and stuff. And he said it is falling apart. It's very dangerous. My dad has an acquaintance who has worked hard in his small business labouring for his whole life, done modestly well. He's about to retire. He has $1 million or so, which doesn't get you too far in Sydney, but not too bad in Queensland. He invested it in a portfolio, and the person who runs the portfolio has left. And he has no retirement. And so he will not retire next year. He will work and not go to Queensland. We're in our 4th week of our talk series about work and our careers and God's word, his wisdom for our work. Week number 1, we saw that work is good. It's part of God's sacred world. The whole thing is spiritual. God has called us, God works, and God has called us to work. And there is ministry. Your work is ministry. And that's because of who Jesus is. He's not the king of the church only. He's the king of all things, of babies staying alive. And so that industry is Jesus' industry. But not just that, I mean, it's so clear in that industry, isn't it? But even the kind of the nitty gritty stuff, accounting fits in God's world. And it's a little not so much on the ground, is it, accounting? It's kind of a little more abstract and what's going on here and how's this good? But order and justice and clarity is part of Jesus' reign in the world. And so accounting too, and everything in between. Week number 2, we saw that what exactly are we doing in work? We're imitating God. We're the image of God, and we, like him, we work. And secondly, when God chooses to bless the world and give new health or give clarity, he does it through our work. And so we ought to see our work as a participation with God's work of blessing. You ought to think as you head into work, God's going to use me today to bring blessing where I go. And then week 3, last week, Matt really beautifully showed us that pattern that God has given us of rest. A pattern where we don't just stop so that we can rejuvenate our muscles so I can dig harder next week or tomorrow. It's not just for rejuvenation. It's actually, rest is a different category of thing. It's about worship. And I found it so stimulating this week to think, and I know Sarah has as well, my wife, to think about my rest as more than just stopping and having a break, but of worshiping. And it's been a pretty positive appraisal of work in those last 3 weeks, hasn't it? But beautifully, God's word here in Ecclesiastes is going to give a pretty negative appraisal of work now. And it's a real blessing for us, and you'll see that. And we're going to take this different approach to work, or a fourth approach to work now, looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. Sarah and I used to have this way of saying, we've stopped saying it, I don't know why, but we used to have this way of communicating a certain thing to each other by, if one of us was feeling like, both of us was feeling like we'd woken up on the wrong side of the bed, or just feeling a bit naff that day, a bit funky that day, we'd say, hey, how you going? That's not really how you talk when you're married. Hey, how are you going? But, how's things or whatever. And the other one would say, actually, feeling a little Ecclesiastes today. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. If I put it like this, Ecclesiastes is kind of the book of meh. You see what I'm saying now? No, let me actually show you what it says, and you'll see what Sarah and I meant by it. It said, I'm feeling a little Ecclesiastes today. And I love actually that one of you told me this week, Ecclesiastes is your favorite book. And I suspect that's because you find rest in not having to pretend about the world. Because listen to how the book starts. Chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Let me just explain that a little. Okay, so the word Ecclesiastes means the teacher. And that's where you get in that first line. Here are the words of the teacher. And who is it? It's the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Probably Solomon, but it could be one of his other sons, as in from further generations down. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. And that line that I've just read to you, the very first bit, is an introduction said by someone else, not the teacher. So you have two characters in this book, big picture speaking. The introducer, or let's call it the kind of author or editor. And then you have the teacher all the way through the book. And at the end of the book, the editor or author comes back and just kind of wraps it up. So you have an introduction and conclusion by someone who's presenting to you the words of the teacher. And here are the words of the teacher. Missed, says the teacher. Utterly missed. Everything is missed. I'm saying missed there. You could say vanity is how it's often translated. Vanity. Everything is vanity. The word missed or vanity is the word in Hebrew havel. And you know this word if you've at all read the Bible, because it's the name of Cain's brother, Abel. In Hebrew, the B and the V do a similar thing, depending on what language you're transliterating into. Abel, havel. Okay, so I'm just going to say it again, but using the word Abel. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem, Abel, says the teacher, utterly able, everything is able. And what it means is morning mist or breath and vapor. And you see why Abel is called Abel, because he's here today and then he's not here tomorrow in the story of Cain and Abel, isn't it? And that's actually a really helpful way to understand the word. Here in the morning mist, gone at 10:30 in the morning. Take that picture of something that really is here. It's not saying it wasn't there, and fog really is there, but then it's gone. And listen again to what the teacher says about all of life, and particularly about work in a minute, but all of life. Havel, Havel, says the teacher. Utterly Havel. Everything is Havel. Have you driven onto a mountain, especially as a kid, maybe looking out the window of planes and you see the clouds and you think, I just really want to know what it feels like to touch a cloud. You're a little closer now because you're on a plane. I just wish I could grab it or eat it or something. I remember driving up Mount Camberwarra in the Illawarra, and beautifully there was cloud on, and the car's driving through. And I said to Dad, we're going to touch it. And Dad says, yes, you can touch it in a minute. We park and open the door, and I finally get to touch the cloud. But it's all moving at me, and it's kind of like it is different, but then it's gone, and it blew away, and suddenly we're in a clear day, and it's gone. And the teacher says that is what life is like. Not that it's not there, but it's not permanent. And actually, he'll use a phrase all through the book, actually, where he says, life is like chasing after the wind. You know, shepherding cats. Try and shepherd wind, even worse. You can't do it. It's a real thing, but you can't do it. And that's what the Bible says about all of life. Now, it says other things too, but this is one of the bits of wisdom from God for us. And particularly about work. So in verse 3, it says, so I'm going to read from the start again. Mist, mist, says the teacher, utterly mist. Everything is mist. What do people gain from all their work at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. And this is what I want you to hear from the Bible today, that God in his word in Ecclesiastes says that work is Havel. And it says here, what do we gain? And later it says there's no gain from work. And I wonder if you think this is a bit of a depressive way to talk about work or to think about work. And I'm going to tell you that there is a way that some people have tried to interpret the book that kind of goes, it's just a foil to the good news, which is, and we'll get to the good news soon, but I'm going to show you in the book that that's not the case. This is not a foil. God is really saying this to us, that mist, it's all mist. So maybe that feels a little kind of negative to you, but I want to suggest that this book is precious, and like that person that told me in the week, this is actually their favorite book. This is precious because it's about our world and it corresponds to your life. Did you see Kathy nod when she finished reading? Kind of, she almost paused and just said, yeah. It's a book that will earth you and make you a little slower. And actually there's some very positive things to say about work and what to do in the face of toil, which we'll come to too, but don't try and shortcut or short circuit. And actually I want to suggest that this message here in Ecclesiastes is a little bit like the earthing wires in a building. Really important, earthing wires in a building. You have all sorts of wires to do all sorts of very beautiful, important things, but you also have earthing wires. There's one just behind the coffee machine outside, and it's a wire that kind of connects in the right spots. Very simple piece of metal, and it connects into the soil. And when a huge electrical shock comes to the system, it doesn't go through the coffee machine, doesn't go through the microphone or anything else, it just goes through the earth and back out into the soil, it earths. And Ecclesiastes can prepare you and earth you for real life. Now, if you call it a foil and say, it's just setting us up for the good news that's coming later, it won't act like an earth. And when things strike you, you'll be knocked over. But if you take these words and hold them as your wisdom, God's word is your wisdom, it can earth your life. So I invite you to enter the dismal world, the misty and vaporous world of Havel Ecclesiastes. All right. And particularly the way we're going to do this is we're going to see, I think it's 7 ways that work is meaningless. Sorry, not meaningless. I'm saying the reason I just said, this is helpful. Actually, the reason I just said meaningless is because sometimes it's been, that word havel has been translated meaningless, but it's, I think, a bit overcooked, and it's better to stick with vapor, mist, because there is a sense that it is there, and meaningless, I think, is over. Anyway, I'm going to show you a list of, I think it's 7 ways that work is havel, vaporous. And then I think there's 4 ways or 4 things to do in the face of vaporous work. All right, so vaporous thing about our work, number 1, is in chapter 1, verse 3. It is saying there that our work doesn't really change the order of things, doesn't change a lot. Listen, and listen to how it tells you that work doesn't change a lot. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north and goes round, it goes, ever returning on its course. All the streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. The place that the streams come from and where they return, and from there they return again. It's saying there's so much work that goes on in the world, but really the earth just stays the same. And nothing ever really goes on in the passage, chapter 1, to say nothing ever really changes very much. We might have, it's not to say that we don't have real breakthroughs and stuff really happens, but the order of our world is the same. I've read a few articles yesterday about what's happening in Russia in Ukraine by Russia. And I don't know how accurate it is, but there's some similarities, they're saying, between what happened before World War II and what is happening now. And even if you don't have to say the political systems are similar, but just the fact that one country, one big powerful country is invading another one that kind of used to be connected to them, the fact that even that is happening again is so shocking, isn't it? Kind of, I thought we were past that. Like, don't we have iPhones now? Yeah. I thought that we weren't going to, like, you think about all the breakthroughs that have happened. Like, human rights breakthroughs and just communication with each other and all these apps that like really are very useful. And then there's the stuff that's not that useful, like jet skis. Like, we invented jet skis since World War II. So many developments and all the things that you have really achieved that really are very good at your work. And yet the same thing is happening again. And it's all vapor, isn't it? Do you understand what Ecclesiastes is saying? It's not saying that nothing happens. It's just saying nothing really changes, though, does it? And the earth will just keep going. And I think of trees that will be there after I die, and you won't be able to tell that I lived by that tree. The tree will be kind of, it doesn't regard me and the things I do. And more than trees, mountains, they just kind of continue regardless of us. That's the first way that work is a miserable business. Now, the reason I'm using that phrase is because it's a phrase from Ecclesiastes. It says, what a miserable business this is, at one point. Okay. Number 2. The developments and profits that you make in your work don't end up in your own hands in a few different ways, actually. So let's do Ecclesiastes chapter 2. It's what Kathy read for us before. So I hated, verse 17, so I hated life because the work that's done under the sun was grievous to me, all of its vapor, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to one who comes after me. And you think either descendants or the people at your workplace. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish, yet they all have control over all the fruit of my toil, which I've poured my effort and my skill into under the sun. This too is meaningless. And the more important your work and the more money that you make in your work, the more this meaningless happens where someone else takes it or it just falls apart and it will cease to be yours and you don't have control over it anymore. There's a vaporousness to work in this way, isn't there? Number 3, work takes us away from other things. Work kind of grows to consume us in a way, doesn't it? Listen to chapter 4, verse 8. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil. Yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked. And why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. Did you hear it? Ecclesiastes says that work grows to consume you, even when there's no reason for you to do it anymore. This man has no descendants to pass the money on to, but he's not content. And it just kind of, I guess I'll keep working. And I suspect you have a sense of that from your work sometimes as well. That was a bit out of order by accident, but so I'll go back to the one beforehand, which is this. The more important your work, so this is number 3. So here's another one. The more important your work, the more it denies you the ability to rest or to enjoy your work. So chapter 2, verse 22 says, what do people get for all their toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All the days of their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. So the more important your work and the more grand thing you are doing, the more it consumes you. So that even when you're not working, you're working. And you can't rest at night, and you start thinking about that thing that the person at work said, or the problem that you can't break through that's going to mean that the thing falls over. And in this way, work is miserable business. Now, as we kind of get well into our list of miserable business, remember, let God build the wires in your building so that the lightning can go through and earth. There's wisdom in not shirking this stuff. Say, because you might say, my work's really great at the moment. And that's fine, I'm not disagreeing. But Ecclesiastes is saying, big picture, work is vaporous. And I'm encouraging you to let God lay these wires. Another one is this. So much of our career and what ends up occurring in our workplaces is not to do with competency or what makes sense, but with jealousy and silly politics, isn't it? Ready? Listen to chapter 4 now, verse 13. It says, better a poor but wise youth, than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before him. But those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after wind. So it kind of tells you how the classic idea of what makes sense as a leader doesn't always make sense. The king has been there for a long time, rather the youth. But then at the end, there's a twist and it says, but then some other people came and they didn't like the youth anymore, so they got rid of him too. And in this way, miserable business. Where's the one? I've lost one that goes with this. Excuse me. There's one that just says, I'm going to have to quote it to you and find it later. There's one that goes with this that says, isn't it true, basically, that all the decisions that happen at work are based on jealousy? Like, it's just kind of internal politics and kind of people trying to prove themselves better than the other guy, the other girl. And in this way, Ecclesiastes says work is miserable. Okay, I'm going to show you one more, which is in business, we earn money and we might progress only to want more money. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10 says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes upon them? And again, we start off maybe as a trainee or maybe first year out of uni or TAFE, and we think, wow, X $1,000 a year, this is going to change my life. And it does, right? And then the next year, there's a bonus or an increase, and you think, wow, this is going to change my life. And it doesn't really, actually. But we kind of just grow this hunger to have more, and we find ways to spend it. I'm very good at finding new ways to spend money. Like when I consider how much I'm earning at the moment compared to how much when I got out compared to how much before uni, like it's this increase, and yet there's still never enough, is there? Kind of, oh yeah, it's a little bit tight at the moment. And in this way, work is this vaporous kind of activity, says the teacher in Ecclesiastes. Okay, I want to show you now some of the things that God says in the face of this vaporous, toilsome labor. And I've been a little shocked and surprised as I looked. The first thing to say is, not that shocking, just comforting actually. The first thing to say is that if your work is a bit boring at the moment, or you just can't seem to progress and you think, I've done the stuff and I'm doing what they asked, it's not necessarily your fault. Work is actually just this thing that doesn't work properly sometimes and regularly. And what's more, God knows about it and he's speaking to it. And so I just want to encourage you that if that's where you are at the moment, or if that's where you find yourself in coming years, God said, yes, that's the way. And it's not necessarily that you're bad at your job. You might be, but not necessarily. It's actually just a system that doesn't always work properly. That's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that even in our toilsome labor, our miserable business, as Ecclesiastes calls it, there are small, substantial consolations from God. And scattered throughout the book, there's these just lovely moments that almost don't make sense because he's just ripped work apart. Then you say, but listen to this. So let me read a few of them to you. So in chapter 2, verse 24, it says, it's the bit that Kathy read where it says, I hate work and life, and it's all just meaningless, chasing after wind. Chapter 2, verse 24 then says, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own work. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. So he just kind of says, it's not that life is meaningless, actually. There is little satisfactions to be found in a good meal on Friday night, and in good food and drink, and in, and even satisfaction in your work. And he says, this is a gift from God. And so it's this strange thing where you've got to hold on to two truths that Ecclesiastes gives you. Work is a chasing after the wind. It's all a bit vaporous. And there's satisfactions to be found in work, and good food and wine. And I'm going to bring this together a little tighter soon, but just grab that as we go past. Let me show you also Ecclesiastes chapter 3, which says the same thing about food and drink, but it adds a little bit more. So chapter 3, verses 9 to 14. What do workers gain from all their toil? I've seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He's made everything beautiful in its time. He's also set eternity in the heart of the human, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in the toil. This is the gift of God. And then he goes on, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it. Nothing can be taken away. God does it so that people will fear him. It's adding a little bit more now. It's saying that work is vaporous, and yet there's satisfaction to be found in food and drink, and God has made it this way so that we will fear him. There's something in the system of work at the moment that turns you to rest in God, and not even rest, but kind of to fear him as God, to know, which means to know him as God. And then chapter 5, verse 12 says, the sleep of the laborer is sweet. Whether they eat little or much, it's sweet. Do you hear what it's saying? It's saying if you've got work that really, is bodily, tiring work, digging holes or that kind of thing, or just anything that tires you out, you'll sleep really well, and that's pretty good. It doesn't matter if you've had a big meal or not, you're just super tired, so you just sleep really well. And if you've ever had sleeping problems, that is a huge gift to be able to sleep. And it says this can be a gift from God through work, where you tire yourself out and sleep really just well. Do you see how there's small pleasures and even substantial pleasures, satisfaction in your toil? So I'm saying first thing in the face of toilsome labor is to know that it's not necessarily your fault. Work is like that sometimes, and that God has said it. Second thing here is that there are some small consolations and real consolations. And the third one, which tries to bring it together a little, is that the book of Ecclesiastes is saying that work is not everything. There's more to life. There's not less to life. We've said in the past few weeks that work's really good in its own ways. And so we don't want to say, just completely avoid work. That's not what Ecclesiastes says. But work is not everything. And you ought not to try and find everything in your work. And if you do, you will find that a vaporous, a misty kind of experience to peg all of your hopes on your work. To need your job to be perfect and to get along perfectly with everybody at work, and to find, I just find work so satisfying at the moment, just getting stuff done all the time. If you look for that kind of work, you won't find it for very long, and you'll constantly either be dissatisfied or changing jobs, trying to find the perfect job. But this says, no, work is not everything. So don't don't think you can find perfection. You can't self-realize through your work, actually. You'll either, you might ruin your work because you're trying to self-realize in your work. I wonder, a little vulnerable with you, extra vulnerable at the moment. Have you had that moment like I've had in the last few years where you realize, I'm probably not going to be unremarkable. Sorry, I am unremarkable. I'm probably not going to be remarkable. I think in your 20s, it's just me. At least in my 20s, I'm like, so when am I going to make my big break and be remarkable? Don't laugh so hard and so fast. No, but it's a moment, isn't it? Well, it was for me where you go, actually, I don't know that I am. I think I might just be reasonable. And, I'll help some people and that'll be good. And Ecclesiastes does that to you. It says, don't try and self-realize through your work because first of all, you might not have the gifts. Second of all, it's not always fair. You might have the gifts and the system just doesn't do it for you. And it's kind of vaporous. So don't try and self-realize through your work. It's good, but it's not everything. This is point number 3 I'm making of what things to do in the face of toilsome labor. Don't try and self-realize through your work. Okay, and then the 4th one is about how to interpret this book and what to do with work. As I said, there's a soft way to take Ecclesiastes where you hear it as just a foil for work doesn't matter. The only thing that really matters is Christian ministry and the Christian life. And so once you become a Christian and get baptized and come to Christ, then you won't experience this meaningless or vaporous pursuit. So quickly become a Christian so you stop experiencing the vaporousness of life. But I think that actually hamstrings the building. And I think that if you've been a Christian for very long, you'll know actually sometimes life still is pretty vaporous. Even though I have Jesus, who is what John chapter 1 says, is he is the word, the meaning of life. And he really is. I'm not at all taken away from that. And yet sometimes just the human experience under him in this time and age is still kind of hell. And I'm saying, grab onto what Ecclesiastes is saying here and let it earth through your building so that when the meaningless or the kind of complete injustice at work happens, when it isn't your self-realization, you're not kind of thrown out of one thing, I'm a naughty Christian, I shouldn't be experiencing this vaporousness. No, Ecclesiastes says that's part of our human experience at the moment. And the reason I'm saying that this is not the experience of someone who's apart from God is because this says this is the experience because of God. Listen to Ecclesiastes chapter 7 that says in verse 13, consider what God has done. Who can make crooked? Sorry, let me start again. Chapter 7, reflecting on all these things, says, consider what God has done. Who can straighten what he has made crooked? When times are good, be happy. But when times are bad, consider this. God has made one as well as the other. Therefore, no one can discover anything about their future. Ecclesiastes doesn't say that the experience of vaporous life is life apart from God. And if you just find him, it won't be so vaporous. No, it says, God has made it crooked in this world. And I think there's something there going on with Genesis chapter 3 where God curses the creation and says, I'm going to make it a little crooked because it can't go on as in this. I'm going to use the same phrase before, hamstring it actually, the order of things. Otherwise, things are going to get out of control. And so it says that God has made creation a little crooked. Now, Romans chapter 8, which I'm not going to preach on, don't let me preach on it. It's not in the plan, as good as it would be. You go look at Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8 said he will straighten it, but Romans chapter 8 does say he made it crooked. And so I encourage you not to downplay what Ecclesiastes say and say, oh, life's just vaporous without God, but with God it's easy and full of kind of steadiness. That's not what it says. Instead, what it says is that God has made one times of happiness. And if work's great, that's good. Just, eat it up and work hard and make extra money so that you can have food and drink and that kind of restful recreation after work. And there's other times when work is just hard and it's unfair and it's frustrating. And there too is a place to find God in one as well as the other. Both are from him. And so I encourage you to look for the Lord Jesus and his, remember, all things have been made through him and for him. So look for him in happy times at work and look for him in the hard times as well. Let me leave us to pray. Gracious God, we thank you for your word that is honest, and I can see why one of us calls it our favorite book, because when we read this, we don't need to pretend and we don't need to feel like naughty Christians when we go through the normal vaporous parts of life. And I pray that you would give us a kind of rest tonight from knowing reality and knowing what the world is really like. And I pray that you would secure us and make us safe for when those times strike. And we would know that this is still your world, and actually your hand is very much in those times. We know that you are not a God that does evil, but you're a good God. And so we with faith look for you in those times that feel meaningless. We just claim now, we know they're not meaningless, but we don't see the meaning. And it feels so empty sometimes in our workplaces and all of our life. So we look for you and we accept with thanks those small pleasures and satisfactions that we have in work and from work. We look to you, our Father and our God, in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand up and praise the one who gives and takes away.
Thank you.